In the heart of a small suburban town, where tree-lined streets usually echoed with children's laughter, an unsettling silence had taken root. Parents whispered among themselves at coffee shops and grocery stores, their faces etched with worry as they shared stories of their little ones coming home in tears. Something was happening at Riverside Elementary School, something that made even the bravest third graders tremble at the thought of recess. It started with missing lunchboxes, torn backpacks, and cruel notes left in desk drawers. Then came the organized isolation, kids being turned away from games, birthday party invitations mysteriously disappearing, and group projects becoming exercises in exclusion. A tight-knit group of fifth graders had appointed themselves the unofficial rulers of the playground, and their reign was anything but benevolent. Little Sarah, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who once skipped to school every morning, now faked stomach aches to stay home. Her mother noticed how her daughter's colorful drawings had turned to darker shades, how her endless stories about school adventures had dwindled to quiet nods. 10-year-old David, who'd proudly worn his superhero lunchbox since kindergarten, now insisted on brown paper bags after his prized possession was dumped in a mud puddle for the third time. The teachers tried their best, but these kids were clever. They operated in shadows, striking when adults turned their backs, mastering the art of innocent smiles and confused shrugs when questioned. Their tactics evolved, becoming more sophisticated with each passing week. They created elaborate systems to track their targets' movements, coordinating their actions through whispered conversations and coded messages passed during class. But they didn't count on Mr. Chen, the new guidance counselor, who noticed patterns where others saw chaos. They weren't prepared for Mrs. Rodriguez, the lunch monitor who started spending her breaks strategically positioned near their favorite ambush spots. And they certainly weren't ready for the fourth grade teacher, Mr. Thompson, who remembered all too well what it felt like to be the kid eating lunch alone. As autumn leaves began to fall, a quiet resistance formed. A network of watchful eyes and caring hearts grew stronger each day. The hall monitors, the librarian, the janitor who always seemed to be mopping the right corridor at the right time. They were all pieces of a puzzle coming together. But the real change began when a group of sixth graders, who had watched the situation unfold for too long, decided enough was enough. These older students had their own painful memories of being targeted, of feeling small and powerless. They had learned the hard way that staying silent only fed the cycle. Now, armed with experience and empathy, they were ready to stand up not just for themselves, but for every kid who'd ever hidden in a bathroom stall to avoid confrontation. What happened next would reshape the social landscape of Riverside Elementary. The movement that started with just a handful of concerned adults and brave students was about to transform into something bigger than anyone expected. As the autumn wind rustled through the playground, carrying whispers of change, no one could have predicted how this story would unfold. The bullies thought they had perfected their system of control. They believed they were untouchable, that their reign would continue unchallenged. But they were about to learn a powerful lesson about community, courage, and the strength that comes from standing together. Because sometimes the most important battles aren't won with fists or harsh words, but with something far more powerful, humanity itself. As the school bell rang that crisp October morning, signaling the start of another day, no one knew that everything was about to change. The question wasn't if the bullies would be stopped, but how their downfall would begin, and who would take the first brave step forward. It began during morning assembly, when Principal Harris stood at the podium with an unusually serious expression. Her normally cheerful face carried the weight of countless parent phone calls and tearful student conversations. As she adjusted the microphone, her eyes swept across the gathered students, lingering briefly on certain faces in the fifth grade section. "Our school has always been a place of learning and growth," she began, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made even the chattiest students fall silent. But lately, some of us seem to have forgotten what that means. The bullies exchanged subtle glances, their faces carefully arranged into masks of innocence. They perfected this act, knowing exactly how to blend into the crowd when adults were watching. But something was different this time. In the back of the assembly hall, Mr. Chen stood with a small tablet, quietly documenting not just the obvious troublemakers, but the subtle reactions rippling through the crowd. He'd spent weeks building a detailed map of social interactions, noting how certain students would tense up when specific fifth graders passed by, how lunch tables would suddenly clear when particular groups approached. The sixth graders' plan had already been set in motion, though few knew about it yet. They called it Operation Lighthouse, a system of support and surveillance that would shine a light into the darkest corners of the schoolyard. Leading the charge was a quiet but determined student named Alex, who'd spent the previous year eating lunch alone after similar bullies had turned his friends against him. Now in sixth grade, he'd found his voice and his courage. During recess that day, the first phase began. As the usual group of bullies approached their favorite target, a small second grader with thick glasses, they found themselves suddenly surrounded by sixth graders playing an elaborate game of tag. Every time they tried to corner their victim, the game would mysteriously shift in that direction, creating a protective barrier of older students. Mrs. Rodriguez, watching from her new monitoring position, noticed something else too. The sixth graders had developed a subtle signal system. A tug on the ear meant bully approaching, while adjusting a shoelace signaled target spotted. They were fighting fire with fire, using the same sophisticated coordination that the bullies had perfected, but for protection rather than persecution. In the cafeteria, the changes were even more apparent. The sixth graders had quietly rearranged their lunch schedules, creating what they called safe zones, tables where younger students could sit knowing that older, protective eyes were nearby. Mr. Thompson's fourth grade class had joined the movement too, after he'd introduced a series of random seating assignments that strategically placed potential targets near supportive classmates. The bullies weren't used to this kind of organized resistance. Their usual tactics, isolating targets, spreading rumors, creating exclusive groups, began to fall flat as their victims found themselves surrounded by unexpected allies. The protective network grew stronger each day, with even the shy kids finding ways to contribute. Some became lookouts, others specialized in distraction techniques, and a few brave souls documented everything with careful notes passed to Mr. Chen. But the bullies weren't going down without a fight. They adapted their tactics, becoming more subtle, more sophisticated. They started spreading rumors about their protective sixth grade enemies, trying to turn the tables. They attempted to infiltrate the support networks, pretending to have changed their ways. Each move was met with calm, calculated responses from the growing resistance. The school librarian, Ms. Baker, noticed an interesting trend during this time. Books about friendship, courage, and standing up to bullies began disappearing from the shelves, not because they were being hidden or destroyed, but because students were actually reading them. The sixth graders had started a secret book club, sharing stories that reflected their own struggles and victories. As October rolled into November, the atmosphere at Riverside Elementary shifted subtly but significantly. The changes weren't dramatic or sudden, no grand confrontations or dramatic showdowns. Instead, it was like watching a garden grow, with tiny seeds of kindness and courage taking root one day at a time. Little Sarah still felt nervous coming to school some days, but now she had friends walking with her in the halls. David's new superhero lunchbox, a gift from his sixth grade buddy, sat proudly on his desk, untouched by those who once would have made it a target. The bullies still prowled the hallways, but their kingdom was shrinking, their power diminishing with each act of collective courage. The true test of Operation Lighthouse was approaching, though. The annual school fair was just weeks away, an event that had traditionally been the bullies' favorite hunting ground, with its crowds and chaos providing perfect cover for their activities. The sixth graders knew this would be their biggest challenge yet, and as they gathered in Mr. Thompson's classroom after school to plan, the weight of their mission hung heavy in the air. They had made progress, but the war wasn't won yet. The real question was, what would happen when the bullies, cornered and desperate, decided to make their final stand? The resistance had grown stronger than anyone expected, but would it be enough to face what was coming? As Alex looked around at his fellow sixth graders, he saw both determination and uncertainty in their eyes. They had started something powerful, but the hardest part of their journey still lay ahead. The morning of the school fair arrived with a mix of excitement and tension in the air. Colorful banners fluttered across the playground, and the smell of popcorn wafted from the cafeteria where parent volunteers set up food stands. But beneath the festive atmosphere, both sides were preparing for what they knew would be a decisive day. Alex and his team had spent weeks developing what they called the Fair Play Protocol. Every sixth grader wore a small blue ribbon, supposedly in school spirit, but really a way to identify allies quickly in the crowd. They had mapped out the entire fairground, marking potential trouble spots and establishing patrol routes. Even some of the younger students had been given special roles, working as messengers between the different zones of protection they'd established. The bullies, however, hadn't been idle. Through whispered conversations and careful observation, Mr. Chen had learned they were planning something big. They'd been suspiciously quiet over the past week, and several students reported seeing them huddled together during recess, speaking in hushed tones while looking over what appeared to be hand-drawn maps of the school grounds. As families began arriving for the fair, Mrs. Rodriguez noticed something odd. The usual group of troublemakers had split up, each taking different positions around the schoolyard. They were dressed identically in red T-shirts, supposedly showing school spirit, but she recognized it as a tactical choice. They were coordinating something, using the crowd's excitement as cover for whatever they had planned. The first sign of trouble came at the face painting station. A group of second graders who'd been targeted in the past suddenly found their path blocked by 3 red-shirted fifth graders. But before anything could happen, a 6th grade girl accidentally spilled her water bottle, creating a distraction that allowed the younger kids to slip away safely. Near the game booths, another incident was brewing. The bullies had positioned themselves strategically, creating a gauntlet that their usual victims would have to walk through to reach the popular activities. But they hadn't counted on Mr. Thompson's quick thinking. He'd organized a series of special helper assignments, keeping potential targets busy at supervised stations far from the danger zones. The tension reached a new level when Alex intercepted a folded note being passed between the red-shirted students. His heart raced as he read it. They were planning to sabotage the grand finale, the moment when the whole school would gather for the principal's closing speech and the raffle drawing. Their plan was to use this opportunity to publicly humiliate several of their long-term targets, thinking the crowd would make it impossible for anyone to stop them. As the afternoon wore on, the resistance network kicked into high gear. Ms. Baker, manning the book sale table, became their central intelligence hub. Students would casually browse books while whispering updates about bully movements and potential threats. She relayed this information to Mr. Chen through carefully coded comments about book recommendations. The bullies were getting frustrated. Every time they tried to isolate a target, a 6th grader would appear. When they attempted to corner someone in a quiet spot, a teacher would mysteriously need to check that area. Their carefully planned attacks kept falling apart, and their leader, a particularly strong-willed 5th grader, was visibly losing patience. With just an hour left before the closing ceremony, Alexa's team intercepted another message. The bullies were changing their plans, making them more aggressive, more public. They were tired of being outmaneuvered and had decided to make their final stand dramatic and unforgettable. The note mentioned the stage, the raffle box, and a plan that would make sure everyone remembers who really runs this school. As parents and students began gathering near the stage area, the atmosphere grew electric with anticipation. Principal Harris stood at the podium, shuffling her papers, unaware of the drama unfolding before her. The red-shirted 5th graders were moving into position, their faces set with determination. The 6th grade protectors exchanged worried glances. They knew this was the moment everything had been building toward. Alex watched as the bullies' leader slowly made his way toward the stage, a folded piece of paper clutched in his hand. Whatever they had planned, it was about to happen. The resistance members were in place, but would they be able to stop whatever was coming? The crowd grew quiet as Principal Harris tapped the microphone, and in that moment, everyone involved knew there was no turning back. The autumn sun was setting behind the school building, casting long shadows across the fairground. As Principal Harris opened her mouth to speak, time seemed to slow down. The next few minutes would determine whether months of intimidation and fear would continue, or if a group of brave students could finally change things forever. The question hung in the air like the last leaf of autumn, trembling before the inevitable fall. Just as Principal Harris began her speech, a sudden gust of wind scattered her papers across the stage. In that moment of chaos, the bully's leader made his move, but what happened next shocked everyone. Instead of heading straight for the stage as planned, he turned and signaled to unseen allies in the crowd. Suddenly, red-shirted students appeared from all directions, far more than anyone had anticipated. They had recruited reinforcements from other grades, doubling their numbers. Alex's heart sank as he realized their careful planning hadn't accounted for this. The sixth grade protection network was spread too thin, their carefully coordinated defense now full of gaps. Through the crowd, he could see the panic in Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes. She had spotted it too. The bullies hadn't just been plotting revenge. They'd been building their own army. But then something unexpected happened. A small figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was Rachel, a quiet fourth grader who had been one of the bullies' first victims that year. She walked deliberately into the center of the gathering, her hands trembling but her head held high. In her hands, she clutched a worn notebook, its pages marked with colorful tabs. The bully's leader faltered for a moment, recognizing the notebook. It was his own, the one containing every plan, every target, every cruel scheme they carried out or planned. Rachel had found it fallen from his backpack weeks ago, but instead of turning it in, she'd done something far more powerful. She kept it, added to it, and gathered proof of every incident. As Rachel opened the notebook, other students began stepping forward, dozens of them, from every grade. Each held up their phones, showing photos and videos they'd secretly taken of the bullies in action. The resistance hadn't just been protecting. They'd been collecting evidence, building a case that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Mr. Chen moved closer to the stage, his tablet now displaying a detailed map of the school with timestamps and locations of every incident. The sixth graders' surveillance network had been more sophisticated than anyone realized, creating a complete record of the bullying campaign. Parents in the crowd began murmuring, recognizing their own children's stories in the unfolding evidence. The bully's leader looked around frantically, watching his carefully constructed plan crumble. But he had one last card to play. He pulled out his own phone, threatening to reveal embarrassing secrets he'd collected about his victims. What he didn't know was that Alex and his team had anticipated this. They'd spent weeks helping targeted students come forward themselves, turning potential shame into strength. Little Sarah, who'd once hidden from school, now stood with a group of fellow students who'd faced similar treatment. David, his superhero lunchbox held like a shield, joined them. One by one, former victims stepped forward, no longer afraid of what could be revealed because they'd already claimed their stories as badges of courage. The crowd's attention shifted as Principal Harris regained control of the microphone. But before she could speak, another unexpected voice rang out. One of the red-shirted fifth graders, looking uncertain, stepped away from his group. His voice shook as he began to speak, revealing how he'd been pressured into joining the bullies, afraid of becoming a target himself if he refused. This confession triggered a ripple effect. More red-shirted students began backing away from their leader, their unified front crumbling as the weight of their actions, now exposed in broad daylight, became too heavy to bear. The resistance's true victory wasn't just in opposing the bullies, but in showing there was a way out, a path to redemption for those who wanted to change. The bullies' leader, now standing almost alone, locked eyes with Alex. In that moment, everyone expected anger, defiance, or even violence. Instead, something in his expression shifted, revealing a glimpse of the scared kid hiding beneath the tough exterior. He opened his mouth to speak, his hand still clutching the paper he'd planned to use to disrupt the ceremony. The entire fairground held its breath, knowing this moment would define not just the outcome of today's confrontation, but the future of their school community. As the autumn sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd, the final act of this long-running drama was about to unfold. But would it end in triumph, tragedy, or something entirely unexpected that would change everyone involved forever? The tension in the air was palpable as all eyes focused on the scene unfolding before them. The next few moments would determine whether months of fear and intimidation would finally end, or if this complex web of bullying and resistance would take yet another unexpected turn. The paper in the bully leader's hand trembled as he looked at the crowd before him. Tears welled up in his eyes, and in a voice that cracked with emotion, he began to read, not the humiliating remarks he'd planned, but something entirely different. It was a letter addressed to his younger brother who would be starting at Riverside Elementary next year. He spoke of his fear that his brother would face the same bullying he had experienced at his previous school, how he decided that becoming the biggest bully was the only way to protect them both. As his words hung in the air, Mr. Chen stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. The guidance counselor had suspected there was more to the story, having noticed how the bully's aggressive behavior had started shortly after moving to the district. The tough exterior had been a shield built from his own painful experiences. Principal Harris, now standing beside them, took the microphone. But before she could speak, Alex made a decision that would change everything. He walked up to the stage, followed by Rachel and several other students who had been leading the resistance. Instead of condemning their former tormentor, they offered something unexpected: understanding and a chance to start over. The real twist came when Sarah, the tiny second grader who had once been too scared to come to school, pulled out her own notebook. In it were drawings, not of scary bullies, but of lonely kids who needed friends. She'd been watching too, seeing past the tough acts to the hurt beneath. Her simple wisdom cut through the tension like a ray of sunlight through storm clouds. The crowd watched in amazement as former victims and bullies alike began sharing stories, each revelation building a bridge of understanding. The red-shirted students, no longer a threatening army, became individuals again, kids who had made mistakes but weren't defined by them. Some cried, others laughed nervously, but all felt the walls of fear and anger crumbling. Mrs. Rodriguez, wiping tears from her eyes, brought out a box that had been hidden under the raffle table. Inside were pledge cards, not just promises to stop bullying, but commitments to actively support and protect each other. The idea had come from the sixth graders, but it quickly spread through the crowd. Parents, teachers, and students began signing, creating a visible symbol of their united community. But the most powerful moment came when the bully leader's little brother, who had been watching from the back of the crowd, ran up to hug his older sibling. The boy had been carrying his own secret. He'd been practicing standing up to bullies, preparing to confront his own brother if necessary. Instead, he found himself part of a bigger change, one that would reshape their school for years to come. The autumn fair, which had begun as a battlefield, transformed into a celebration of transformation. Mr. Thompson brought out the art supplies from his classroom, and students began creating a massive mural, their handprints overlapping in a rainbow of colors, symbolizing their commitment to supporting each other. Even the most hardened bullies found themselves drawn into the activity, their hands adding to the collective artwork. As the sun set on Riverside Elementary that evening, Principal Harris made one final announcement. The school would be starting a new program led jointly by former bullies and their previous targets, teaching younger students about empathy, courage, and the power of standing together. The very students who had once terrorized the hallways would now help guard against future bullying, their past experiences becoming a powerful tool for positive change. The resistance members looked at each other, realizing their victory was different from what they'd imagined. They hadn't just stopped the bullying. They'd helped create something new, a community where strength came from lifting each other up, not pushing others down. Alex watched as his fellow sixth graders mingled with their former adversaries, sharing snacks and tentative smiles. In the gathering dusk, as families began heading home, little Sarah tugged on Alex's sleeve. "Does this mean the story's over?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope. Alex smiled, looking at the changed faces around him. "No," he replied. "I think this is just the beginning of a different kind of story, one we'll all write together." And so, the tale of how humans stood up to terror became something more, a story of healing, understanding, and the incredible power of choosing love over fear. As the last streaks of sunlight painted the sky, the transformed community of Riverside Elementary headed home, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from turning them into friends. In the weeks that followed the school fair, Riverside Elementary underwent a remarkable transformation. The hallways, once filled with whispered fears, now echoed with genuine laughter. The former bully leader, whose name was Tommy, became an unexpected force for positive change. He worked alongside Alex and Rachel, using his leadership skills to organize friendship circles during recess where younger students could share their concerns without fear. Mr. Chen's office became a busy hub of activity, but not for the reasons it once had been. Students dropped by voluntarily, eager to contribute ideas to the new peer support program. The wall outside his office bloomed with colorful sticky notes, each one containing a small act of kindness someone had witnessed that day. The tradition had started spontaneously when a first grader wanted to share how a fifth grader had helped tie her shoelaces. Sarah's drawings took on new life as well. With encouragement from Mr. Thompson, she created a series of simple comic strips about friendship and courage. These were photocopied and shared with other classes, becoming a kind of unofficial guidebook for new students. Her once fearful artwork had evolved into stories of hope and connection, featuring characters inspired by her real-life experiences. The sixth graders' protection network evolved into something even more meaningful, a mentorship program that paired older students with younger ones. David, still proudly carrying his superhero lunchbox, now sat at a table full of friends during lunch. He often told new students about how the school had changed, his story becoming part of Riverside's living history. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed another beautiful change during her lunch monitoring duties. The cafeteria seating arrangement, once rigidly divided by social hierarchies, had become fluid and welcoming. Students moved between tables freely, sharing snacks and stories. The red shirts that had once signified intimidation were redesigned with positive messages, becoming symbols of the school's transformation. Principal Harris implemented a monthly assembly where students could showcase ways they'd helped make the school a better place. But the real magic happened in small, everyday moments. A former bully helping a kindergartner find their classroom, past rivals working together on science projects, children who'd once eaten alone now surrounded by friends. As winter approached, the huge mural from the fair day was formally unveiled in the school's main hallway. Beneath the colorful handprints, students had written messages of hope and commitment. Tommy's message, placed right in the center, read simply, "Change starts with one brave heart." Below it, in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, was added, "and grows with many." The story of Riverside Elementary's transformation spread beyond its walls. Other schools began reaching out, asking how they could implement similar changes. The sixth graders, now preparing for their transition to middle school, knew they were leaving behind a powerful legacy. They had learned that true strength lies not in controlling others through fear, but in building bridges of understanding and support. On a crisp December morning, as Mr. Chen watched students arriving at school, he saw Tommy and his little brother walking together, laughing about something. Nearby, Alex and Rachel were helping some first graders organize a game of tag, making sure everyone who wanted to play was included. The morning sun caught the frost on the playground equipment, making it sparkle like diamonds. A fitting metaphor, he thought, for how pressure and challenges could transform a community into something beautiful. Sarah, passing by with her own group of friends, paused to add one more sticky note to the kindness wall. This one read, "Today, everyone belongs." And in that simple statement lay the heart of their story, a reminder that when humans stand together against fear and hatred, incredible changes are possible. The terror that had once gripped their school had been transformed not through more fear, but through the most powerful force of all, the courage to be kind.